So statistics are showing that teenage anxiety is just part of the milieu that teenagers need to walk through. And it's something that kids can kind of look forward to. That's the reality of what we're seeing. And like my friend John Stonestreet says, statistics aren't destiny for individuals, but they are for civilizations. So in this moment, is dealing with anxiety maybe the most important thing parents can do? Or is anxiety and depression just part of the reality of what our kids are going to face? How do we parent through that? That can lead us to dark places and make us feel like these are dark times. But today in the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy's going to address this issue head on. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, last week, Jonathan Haidt joined Russell Moore on Dr. Moore's podcast to kind of consider the factors that lead to childhood mental health crises. They talked about different things, including iPhones and social media, how the COVID-19 pandemic affected, and they kind of talk about also didn't affect young people. They look back at several decades of American history during which kind of parents have increasingly treated raising kids like a school project or a professional endeavor, and then what we're doing now today. I think Haidt's new book called The Anxious Generation is really an interesting book. I haven't read it yet, but what he talks about on the podcast highlights how childhood is really being rewired and rewritten, he says. I wonder if this is simply kind of maybe a misunderstanding of one generation to the next, or maybe that generations' childhood, that today's generation's children, right? The childhood that my kids are experiencing is wholly unique in terms of human history, and that it's really problematic and is actually causing anxiousness. What are some of your thoughts there? Is this generational moment, this cultural moment, really problematic for kids, and we need to adjust our parenting to meet some of those needs? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think parents always have a responsibility to adjust parenting to meet the needs. So I think that's a given, as much as we possibly can figure out what's going on and do so. You know, it's awkward, Wayne. I'm often asked, is this the most difficult time to be a child? And then I think about, World War, and I think about the economy and the devastation of different times in our country when there really was no money for people. I think of pandemic type situations that were way worse than the one that we were recently walking through. And so I think it's arrogant to say that our children have it worse than any other kids ever had. What I do think is different, maybe a couple of things. That is that right and wrong is really fluid now. When I was a child, even people who did not go to church agreed with what was right and what was wrong. There was an understanding of good and evil, and those things were talked about. Now there's so many different definitions of right and wrong and good and evil. So you can have in your family that this is right, and your neighbors can think something else is right. So your children are living very much exposed to evil and falsehood, if I would put it that way, which makes the parents' responsibility to teach truth and explain your standard for truth very differently from maybe what our parents had to do when we were young. I think another thing that is different is the marital status. I think, more single parents, more divorces, less dad involvement, dad engagement is at a low ebb in our country. And I think that matters. I think kids are striving and hungry for dads. And I think there's some danger there that's probably at some statistical high point. And then the busy, distracted parents. So when I wrote my technology book, that came out in 2016. That meant I started thinking and writing about it in 2014 probably. And there weren't a lot of kids on devices back then. I wrote that book because parents were on devices. And if they weren't careful, their kids were going to develop these 5 lies. But the reason that parenting had become hard was that the parent was distracted. The parent was scrolling social media rather than engaging with the kid. The dad was checking, ESPN.com and a banking website and a younameit.com rather than, shooting hoops with the son out in the driveway. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm not making that up. It was the parent who became distracted and self-centered and selfish, and that selfie motive, if you will, that left the kid wondering, do I matter here? Am I known here? Is what I'm doing important here? And now we have almost the flip side where kids are, moms are posting 62 pictures. True story of a kid who said, I didn't want any pictures of my birthday party on my mom's social media. She didn't ask permission. I didn't want any. She posted 62. And he was really mad that he felt used by her for some popularity points with her people. So it's those are the things I think of when I think about today's generation, the anxiety, and what parents need to be cognizant about. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. And I think that is an example of something that we do a lot here at Celebrate Kids, which is to come alongside parents and provide resources to point out things that you're seeing, and then also to embolden and inspire them, really to engage what I might kind of call a slow fade inside of culture, and draw some attention to it, so that especially inside of the church and inside of our communities, that we can maybe stem the tide of how that's going to impact kids and how they're going to develop and grow. And I'd like to kind of point out this to you, because I think there's a lot of ministries and a lot of engagement in different kind of communities that put these habits or these rhythms or these resources in front of parents to help them. But it kind of begs the question. I just want to ask it because I think it's important to, not just kind of assume things, that we should actually ask questions and get insight and have an apologetic for why we think. Are parents really the answer to the anxiety that kids are facing? Or is there really something inside of culture that needs to change? That institutions need to change? It kind of goes to that point that we've talked about before, where government is going to now go after different social media groups because it's impacting kids. But we kind of have bypassed parents. What can parents kind of really do in the face of anxiety and depression, knowing that so much of the culture in the world seems to be hardwired for that direction?
Yeah, again, boy, I like the way you think. I do believe parents have a responsibility to do what they can. And I've got some thoughts, surprise, surprise, that I can share with you. And I also want to say that it's not always the parent. There are fabulous parents who are engaged and living a less stressful life in front of their kids, and the kids just turn out to be prone to anxiety. There are chemical imbalances, which is why there's nothing wrong with medication. There's nothing wrong with therapy and counseling and going to the doctor. Now, I don't pop a pill for everything, and I'm not saying that everybody with anxiety needs to go see somebody, but I am saying that self-care is really important. If you feel that you're anxious, get self-care. And that can be a long bubble bath with a good book and a candle. It doesn't have to be therapy. But are you demonstrating to your kids self-care? Are you willing to humble yourself and see someone if you need to talk through some things because life has thrown you some curveballs? Have you allowed your kids to see a guidance counselor or talk to a children's pastor or talk to a therapist if that's appropriate? So I think I would say that. I think if a parent does not, one of the ways that parents are relevant here is if the parent's yes changes to no, or the no changes to yes, or if a parent uses maybe a lot, you're going to have stress. Kids are looking for consistency. They're looking for integrity. They're looking for boundaries that are blessings when love is the goal. So make your yes a yes, make your no a no, and stay away from maybe. And if your kids ask, hey, on Friday night, could I do such and such? And you say, well, I don't know. I got to check with your dad. So that right now I don't know. I mean, that's legit. But then check with your husband, get the answer ASAP, and go back to your child and say what the truth is. The answer is yes, you may go to your friend's house Friday, or no, we're really sorry, it's not going to work. We already had these committed plans. So yes and no, and get away from maybe. And then what if I said this, Wayne? I wonder if in our culture today, we could think more about managing anxiety than not being anxious. Like, I want us to not be anxious. Certainly, that would be ideal. But in reality, there's soccer games and piano recitals and tests coming up and graduation rates and scholarships, and dad is busy and grandma's dying and the dog got hit by a car. I mean, I could go on and on, right? There are things that happen. This is always true. This is not a unique cultural moment, but anxiety may be a part of what's going on. And I wonder if we did a better job of teaching children, again, self-care and other strategies to manage anxiety rather than don't be anxious. I wonder if that would be healthy.
Yeah, that goes to my final question that I want to ask you. And that is, you've been speaking a lot of maybe kind of on the front end. How do we, equip our kids to manage not being anxious? How do we kind of build resiliency for them inside of some of these spaces. But I want to ask you now, for the parents that really they do have an anxious child at home right now and maybe facing some challenges with, depression or different forces that kind of feel like the culture's happening. And I've used this phrase a lot with my friends recently, where sometimes we need to build our homes to have maybe some hedges around them that kind of equip our kids to foster, muscles or develop like strength to go out into the world, right? So an example would be that we want our homes to have a void of violence, right? Out in the world, there's a lot of images and violence, but when they come to our house, it should almost be a haven where they don't have to deal with all of the things of the world. It can be a place where they just kind of grow. And I think that for many times, kids that have different anxious thoughts or depressive thoughts or things of that nature can really be impacted by the cultural forces in the world. How can we establish our homes to be a haven for kids who are anxious if we do have some of them in our homes?
Well, I love what you just said. We decide what could contribute to anxiety, and we work to avoid it in our home. So back to your example of violence, we don't watch violent movies. We don't play games individually or with others that would have a violent edge to them. We try to keep the news of violent actions away from the eyes of our littles. So I think that's a great example. What do we believe contributes to anxiety, and what control do we have, and do we exhibit that control? I think we need to be present to our children so they'll come to us when they do struggle with what they've seen or heard or what they're wondering about. Are we available without our phones? Do we go for a walk one-on-one? Do we, go for daddy and donuts with one daughter at a time? And I know time is tough, but do we put them first so that they're aware that we know them and we want them to share with us? I think another thing that creates anxiety would be unrealistic expectations. So do we know our children well enough? I talk about this all the time, don't I, Wayne? Know your children, study your children, teach and love and parent your children, the ones you have, not the ones you wanted to have, and not your neighbor's kids, but your kids. So are your expectations realistic? One of the things I say about academics, if you don't celebrate your child's B, like you want an A, I know you want them to earn an A, but if they only get Bs, if they earn Bs and you don't celebrate it, it'll become a C. And I know that that's true. And so is your expectation for them fair based on who they are and what they're striving for? Talk about strengths. We can have a red pen mentality toward life. I get that the parent is responsible for pointing out the child's challenges to strengthen them. I totally get that. But we use our strengths to overcome our weaknesses. So is your home one where strengths are celebrated and known? And then I'll say one other thing, and this is because kids tell me this. As I think about this, you stimulate so much. Teach your children how to be. Don't tell them who to be. In other words, don't tell and yell. Kids tell me, they tell me what to do, and then they yell at me if I don't do it. I wish they would teach me how. Now, they don't say it with exactly those words, but that's the story they're telling me is, Dr. Kathy Lady, I want to be good. I want to do what daddy wants me to do, but I don't know how to do it. And if I ask him to show me again, then he gets mad that I wasn't listening. But Dr. Kathy Lady, I was listening, but I don't think daddy knows that I've never done it before and it's pretty tricky and I'm pretty scared and I'm a little kid and the broom is really heavy and I'm just afraid. And I wish that he would slow down and show me one more time. And so I want to say with a lot of respect for our audience that put yourself in the shoes of the 7-year-old overwhelmed or the 14-year-old kid who lacks confidence and teach them how to do what it is that you believe they're capable of doing and build up their confidence. And I think you'll see anxiety run.
So there's a passage out of Titus that I was reminded of as Dr. Kathy was speaking. It comes out of Titus 2, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 1. You, however, must teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith and love and in endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way that they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to too much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, and to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. Similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. in your teaching, show integrity and seriousness, soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. I think that Dr. Kathy's words here, her encouragement to teach and to guide our kids, is something that is really valuable, but it's also something that is really standing the test of time. That our place in this cultural moment is similar to the place of Titus in that cultural moment. And it's similar to the place of Daniel and his cultural moment and his responsibility to teach the young men who were under his care. I think that as we think about Titus's encouragement, this encouragement to set an example by doing what is important and to do it in such a way that shows integrity and seriousness and also soundness of speech, I think as we take our responsibility seriously, that's a bright light that's going to cut through the confusion and misunderstandings that kind of happen with teens that really, I think, drives and leads to anxiety and depression because there's no foundation by which that they can have security. That's something that Dr. Kathy's talked about. That's something that we find in scripture. And that's something that I think that you can give to your kids today and this week as you work with them. So I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this daily segment, Face in the Dark. We're starting a new week here, and we're really excited to do it with you. Thanks for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.